Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world that smells like horse manure, sounds like groaning wood and coughing peasants, and feels like burlap rubbing against unwashed skin. You wake up on a scratchy mattress stuffed with straw that pokes through the fabric and into your back. Not that it matters, because you've been tossing and turning all night thanks to lice crawling across your scalp. The room smells faintly of damp mold, and something worse, something that suggests someone didn't quite make it to the chamber pot. There's no privacy, by the way. You share this tiny wooden room with at least 4 other people, one of whom snores like a dying goat. And did I mention it's still dark? The rooster hasn't even thought about crowing yet, but your day has already begun. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to comment your location and local time, because I love seeing where you all are listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shiver under a coarse wool blanket, your only defense against the chill that seeps through the wooden walls. There's no insulation here. Wind whistles right through the gaps. You look up, and the ceiling is a patchwork of wooden beams and cobweb. A spider might be watching you from the corner, but frankly, it's probably more scared of you than you are of it. Or maybe not. Either way, it's a roommate now. As you sit up, your joints creak like the floorboards beneath you. You slept in your clothes because pajamas aren't a thing. And even if they were, you couldn't afford extra garments. Your feet hit the icy dirt floor, and immediately, you're reminded that shoes are a privilege. Yours are leather, but the soles are worn so thin, they barely count. You slip them on anyway and avoid the chamber pot with a well-practiced sidestep. It's half full. It always is. There's a reason even modern historians gag when they describe medieval hygiene. You make your way outside and are met with the gentle fragrance of rotting hay, manure, and open sewage. Your neighbors have already dumped their waste into the gutter that runs through the center of the street, and it's now a slow-moving river of filth. You breathe through your mouth, not that it helps. Flies hover in thick clusters, and rats scurry around like they own the place. Some might argue they do, and while the village seems peaceful in the pre-dawn mist, you know it's only a matter of time before the noise starts. Clanging pots, shouting vendors, and the occasional rooster whose internal clock is permanently broken. The stillness of the early morning is deceptive, like the calm before a very long, very dirty storm. Back inside, your family is stirring. Your little brother scratches at his scalp with the desperation of someone losing a war to head lice. Your mother lights a stub of a tallow candle, not for light, but to find the least moldy bit of bread to hand out. It's hard as rock. You gnaw at yours slowly, trying not to crack a tooth. And while you chew, you look around and realize your room is also your dining room and also your everything else. Privacy is a modern luxury. Here, it's everyone in one room, all the time. And no, there's no bathroom, just a chamber pot. Again, it's tempting to romanticize the past, but the truth is, even royalty didn't have it that good. The king might have servants to empty his chamber pot, but it's still a pot, and it still smells like yesterday's stew gone horribly wrong. And before you think of sneaking off for a bath, don't. Most people bathe once a month. Maybe soap is a rare treat, and warm water, even rarer. Historians still argue whether people of the Middle Ages genuinely believed bathing was unhealthy, or if they just hated the hassle. But one thing's for sure, You are not getting clean anytime soon. Meanwhile, a rooster finally decides to participate, letting out a strangled crow that sounds like it's been drinking. You step outside, the mud sucking at your already frayed shoes. The entire street is alive. Now people are up, pigs are running loose, and someone is already yelling at someone else about borrowed tools. There's a strange rhythm to the chaos, though, and you move through it with practiced resignation. You're already dreading the day ahead. But first things first, fetch water. The village well is a short walk, but it might as well be a mile when you read carrying heavy wooden buckets back and forth. The water isn't clean. Not really. You've seen what falls into that well bug's leaves. Once even a dead cat. But it's better than drinking from the stream, which doubles as a bath, laundry site, and livestock trough. The sun finally starts to peek over the horizon, casting a soft orange glow on the roofs of thatched cottages. For a moment, it is almost pretty until a goat knocks over a basket of something you read pretty sure was once edible. The owner swears loudly, kicks the goat, and gets kicked in return. Life in the Middle Ages doesn't pause for your bad mood. And you're already dreaming of something warmer, cleaner, and with central heating. But hey, it's just the beginning of the day. You're still chewing on that hunk of bread as you shuffle into the cold dawn, and your jaw already aches. It's not the soft, fresh kind you might pick up from a bakery today. Stale slab of rye or barley that has spent more time sitting out than you'd care to admit. Your teeth grind through it like old gears, and every bite feels like a gamble. One slip, and your tooth might just crack dentists. After all, are centuries away from being helpful. The flavor, somewhere between bitter and bland, with the faintest note of charcoal that's not seasoning its ash from the heart. Still, you chew slowly because it's all you've got. There's no butter, unless the cow gave milk yesterday, and the cow hasn't been in a generous mood lately. You glance over at your neighbor, who's already elbow deep in a pile of firewood, and realize you're running late for your own chores. There is no such thing as a lazy morning in the 1300s, not unless you're re-sick or dying, which are sadly frequent outcomes around here. Your hands go numb the second you grip the axe handle, the cold seeping straight through the wood. Your job this morning: chopped kindling, feed the chickens, and start scrubbing the family-ass wooden bowls in a bucket of water that has more mud than liquid. You trudge toward the coop, the straw crunching underfoot, and push open the rickety gate. The chickens glare at you like you've already disappointed them. You scoop feed mostly crushed grains with some questionable lump sand. Toss it into the pen. Immediately, a small battle royale breaks out among the hens, feathers flying as they peck furiously. You step back just in time to avoid a peck to the ankle. It's a scene you've seen every day, but it doesn't get less absurd. Meanwhile, you're still hungry. One crust of bread does not a breakfast make. But if you're lucky, a small ladle of thin ale might show up mid-morning because water is often less safe to drink than fermented grain. Back at your house, your mother is scraping burnt porridge off the pot with a stick, mumbling about rationing. Food isn't measured by appetite here, it's measured by availability. Everything is rationed. Every grain, every root vegetable, every precious pinch of salt. And if you're thinking of asking for more, don't. It's not about being polite, it's about survival. You feel the rumble in your stomach and already know it won't go away until evening. Maybe not even then. 1 in 4 harvests fails. And when that happens, you get creative with your meals. Bark, boiled weeds, even ground acorns if you're desperate. Historians still argue whether acorns were a staple or a starvation last resort, but you'll likely find out soon enough. By now, the sun's well up, and it's time for your daily labor, which could mean anything from helping mend a fence to lugging heavy stones for a nearby construction. Today, it's hauling firewood to the Manakachuna, tedious, splinter-laced task that will eat up the next few hours. You hoist a bundle onto your back, the weight's throwing you off balance as you make your way down the dirt path. It's muddy, uneven, and threaded with deep cart ruts. You nearly twist your ankle twice and stub your toe once on something that might have been part of someone else's lunch yesterday. The Manna Kitchen itself smells incredible meat, onions, herbs, but none of it is for you. You're not even allowed inside. You just drop the bundle outside the door and nod silently at the cook, who's too busy yelling at a scullery boy for burning the stew. On your way back, you spot a few boys chasing a hoop with a stick, laughing like they've got nothing better to do. You remember when you had the energy for that. These days, you're more focused on not collapsing. But still, it's something. Maybe later, you'll join after you've finished washing the goat's hooves or repairing that section of the fence. The pig's broke again. You pass by the village blacksmith, who's already coated in soot, his hammer ringing out like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. His arms are massive, his lungs probably full of iron dust, and his shirt so drenched in sweat it's practically steaming in the morning chill. You nod again. That's the only real communication here, nods grunts. The occasional curse when someone drops a scythe on their foot. You finally make it home. Hands aching, back sore, and your fingers splintered. You want to rest, but there's still laundry to do. And by laundry, we mean dragging a basket of clothes down to the stream and bashing them against rocks. Soap, if you're lucky, a bit of lye. More often, it's just hope and elbow grease. The water is cold enough to bite your skin raw, and halfway through, your fingernails start turning blue. You glance over and see someone's underwear float downstream, probably never to be seen again. But nobody yells. Everyone just accepts it. That's life here. Frustrating, freezing, and fundamentally unfair. Still, there's a strange rhythm to the day. As your body starts to ache into a sort of numbness, your mind zones out. You focus on the sound of the stream, the birds calling faintly in the distance, the occasional clink of metal from the farrier's forge. It's not peace exactly, more like resignation, but it passes for calm. And maybe, for a brief moment, that's enough. Until you hear your name being yelled from the distance. Time to haul water again. Or maybe help catch the pig that escaped last night. You groan quietly and start moving. Because in the Middle Ages, standing still for too long means someone will give you more work. Or worse, accuse you of idleness, which in some parts is enough to earn a whipping, and don't even think about complaining. That's a fast way to find yourself doing twice as much tomorrow, or being called soft, or, if you're really unlucky, being signed up for the next church roof repair heights, and unstable beams included. Your stomach grumbles again. Your hands are already raw, and you've still got half a day ahead. And here's the kicker. You're actually considered healthy right now. You haven't bathed in over 2 weeks, and frankly, no one expects you to. Personal hygiene in this time period is a casual suggestion at best, and a rare luxury at worst. You reach up to scratch your scalp, and your fingers come away with something tiny and moving lice. Again, you crush it without thinking. Everyone has them. Lice. fleas, sometimes even bed bugs. If you're lucky enough to sleep indoors, you don't flinch anymore. It's just part of the background noise of your skin now. Your clothes haven't been washed since last month, and the wool tunic you're wearing has developed a stiff, greasy sheen from layers of sweat, smoke, and whatever else the day has thrown at you. Underwear. Maybe if you own more than 2 garments total, and even then, it's just a linen scrap tied around your waist, more for modesty than function. You head to the communal washing barrel not to bathe, but to splash some of the murky, reused water onto your face. The water is icy and stings your skin, but for a moment, you feel vaguely human. No soap, of course. Soap is a rich man's tool, or something the apothecary might try to sell you as a luxury. Most people just rub ashes or sand on their skin and call it a day. Your teeth, meanwhile, haven't seen a toothbrush, because those haven't been invented. If you're diligent, you might use a cloth to rub off the film building on them, or maybe chew on a twig until it frays. Then scrub with that. Your breath smells like old onions and fermented grain, and it's not much different from the people around you. Everyone smells. The whole village smells. It's a thick, sour mix of unwashed bodies, animal sweat, manure, damp wood, and wet wool. You get used to it, eventually, not because it fades, but because your nose gives up. Bathing is complicated anyway. First, you'd have to heat water, which takes forever and means wasting precious firewood. Then you need a tub, which most peasants don't own. So you either bathe outside or sponge yourself down in a bucket like a sad root vegetable. There's an old wooden tub behind the blacksmith's house, but it's usually reserved for soaking animal hides, not people. Historians still argue whether medieval folks genuinely believed bathing caused illness by opening the pores, or whether it was just too much work to bother with. But either way, nobody's rinsing off their troubles. At the end of the day, you wipe your hands on your tunic again, adding another layer to its growing patina of grime. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a puddle. Your face looks older than you are. Everyone looks older. A 16-year-old can pass for 30 when they're weathered by constant labor, malnutrition, and the absence of skincare. Acne isn't your biggest concern, boils are, and no one wants to deal with those, especially without proper medicine. Speaking of which, you've got a cut on your forearm from yesterday's wood splitting, and it's already looking red and puffy. You dab a bit of mashed onion on it because someone's grandmother swears it helps. And frankly, it's better than nothing. You glance around and see your neighbor using pig fat to treat a rash on his leg. The local herbalist claims goose grease works better, but she's 3 villages away and often mistaken for a witch anyway. You scratch at the bite on your ankle and pretend not to care when it oozes a bit. Your body is constantly under attack, not from warfare, but from the elements, parasites, infections, and your own immune system being in a perpetual state of panic. You know someone who died from a toothache last winter. You remember how it started as a dull ache and ended with swelling the size of an egg, fever that left him babbling nonsense before he passed. No dentists, no antibiotics, just prayers and poultices. The idea of floss would sound like a fairy tale to you, and yet people still manage. They get up, they work, they ache, and they repeat. Hygiene is a matter of how much discomfort you're willing to ignore. In your case, the answer is a lot. You smell yourself and briefly wonder if it's worth rinsing your armpits with that leftover cooking ale, but you decide against it. Too valuable, You reach into your pocket and find a dried lavender sprig someone gave you weeks ago. You crush it between your fingers and sniff, trying to replace the layers of human and animal funk with something anything less offensive. It helps. A little. But the stench always returns. And here's a fun tidbit. Some nobles use crocodile dung as sunscreen. You don't have access to crocodiles, but that mental image alone makes you feel slightly better about your own hygiene struggles. Someone walks by carrying a bucket of what looks like grayish soap butt. Turns out to be lard mixed with ashes for tanning hides. You keep walking. You try to ignore the itching, the oily feeling on your face, the scabs behind your knees. It's normal. This is normal. At some point, you stop wondering what clean smells like. Your concept of fresh is now just less awful. You hear someone talking about the bathhouse in the next town over, where you can pay a small fee to share a big wooden tub with several other strangers. It sounds like both a dream and a nightmare. The idea of sitting in hot water, even for a few minutes, makes your muscles ache with anticipation. But then again, you've also heard stories of lice infestations spreading like wildfire there. And where you sigh and keep walking. There's no escape from dirt here. Not on your body, not in your home, not in your food. You step in something unidentifiable and mutter under your breath. The pig that caused it snorts unapologetically. You scratch your scalp again. And so you keep trudging forward, greasy hair clinging to your temples, fingers cracked and calloused, your skin sticky with effort, and your clothes heavy with the weight of every chore you've ever done. And the day's not even half over. You tug at the rough wool tunic hanging unevenly on your shoulders. It seems scratchy against your skin, and the neckline stretched from repeated wear and tugging. Fashion, if you can call it that. ISNT really. About expression here at S. About not freezing to death or flashing the village by accident. Your shirt is one of only two you own. Dyed a brownish gray. There was probably once beige. Now permanently stained with sweat and soot. You cinch a frayed rope around your waist to keep it all together, no belts. Unless you read rich. And definitely no buttons or zippers. Just ties, knots, and a lot of hope. Under that, you've got wool hose pulled up over your legs, itchy and sagging at the knees, already patched with mismatched bits of cloth. They slide down every time you move too fast. So you've gotten used to walking like you rebalancing a bowl of soup on your head. No underpants today. They're still drying from yesterday's wash, and you can't afford a spare. Over it all, you layer a coarse, sleeveless surcoat for warmth. The edges fraying and stiff with sweat salt. The shoes, leather, technically, but they're more like leather ideas than flat, and so cracked at the toes that pebbles work their way in while you walk. Laces are just strings. Soles are stitched with thick thread, worn through so badly that rain turns them into instant fashion. Historians love to talk about medieval embroidery and rich velvets, but that's for the 1%. You're dressing for survival, not style. You reach down to adjust your foot prap strips of cloth. You've had tied around your ankles to prevent blisters. They're damp, always damp, probably from yesterday's puddle, or possibly your own sweat. Either way, your toes have long since lost feeling. Gloves would be great, but you lost one chopping wood last winter, and now you just wrap your hands in old cloth and call it innovation. Your cloak, if you even have one, is a hand-me-down from someone shorter and bulkier. It hangs awkwardly around your frame and has a hole near the collar that keeps getting bigger every time you tug on it. Pins and brooches are for nobility you tie. Things shut or let them flap. The idea of matching anything is hilarious. You wear what's available, and more importantly, what still holds together. If it's too cold, you just layer more wool. Doesn't matter if it restricts movement or smells like the goat shed. You walk stiffly because everything you're wearing has its own weight and stiffness, like armor made of poverty. Meanwhile, you pass someone wearing almost the same outfit because everyone does some combination of wool, linen, and resignation. The only variety is in how badly each piece is fraying. There's the occasional splash of color, sure, but even that, muted plant-based dyes fade quickly, especially when clothes are washed in rivers and dried over smoky hot. If you were lucky enough to own anything dyed blue or green, it was probably gifted or inherited, and you'd guard it like treasure. And don't even ask about underlayers. What you wear is what you live in. No changing into something comfortable after chores. You sleep in this, work in this, and maybe die in it. And if you do, your clothes will probably be claimed by someone else before your body goes cold. You feel a chill breeze sweep through the street, and every layer suddenly feels like tissue paper. Wool's great when dry, but once it's damp, it clings like a wet towel and smells like despair. You wrap your arms around yourself, wishing for something softer, something lined or padded. Historians still debate whether peasants ever wore fur linings or if that S just a myth from bad illustrations. But either way, you've never seen one. The Lord's hunting party rides past you on horseback, their cloaks billowing dramatically, and boots polished enough to reflect sunlight. You watch them, equal parts awed and annoyed. Their outfits are fitted, tailored, even clean. They smell like herbs and leather oil, not smoke and pig droppings. You lower your head respectfully, not just out of obligation, but because your tunic's collar is too tight to look up without choking a little. The guards flanking them wear chainmail, their surcoats stitched with a house emblem. You wonder how much wool it would take to trade for something even half that warm. But you already know the answer more than you'll ever earn. You spot a woman across the way mending her apron, a tiny needle darting through the fabric with practiced rhythm. Every stitch is careful, deliberate. Thread is valuable. So are needles. Lose one, and good luck finding a replacement. You've used thorns in a pinch, and it did not go well. You think about patching the hole in your sleeve later. But then again, it's been there so long, it feels like part of the original design. As you trudge along the lane, you tug your cloak tighter and try to ignore the cold creeping up your legs. You could try wrapping your feet in straw, like some do, but that just turns into soggy mush after half a day. The irony is that layering more clothing, dose, and tea always help. It just adds weight and traps the dampness closer to your skin. But take anything off, and you're one gust away from frostbite. You wonder what it would feel like to wear something clean and soft, maybe linen sheets. Silk if you dare to dream, but it might as well be moonlight. That kind of comfort isn't just rare, it's practically mythological. Meanwhile, your hat is a shapeless wool lump, squashed from rain and too many hands. It slides over one ear awkwardly, and you let it, because fixing it would require taking your hand out of your cloak. Every step in this outfit is a negotiation. How to move without tearing something else. How to bend without reopening that knee patch. How to breathe without tasting the inside of your collar. But somehow, despite it all, You carry on wrapped in a lumpy, itchy collection of fabric that tells the whole story of your life. Nothing fancy, often broken, but just enough to keep going. You step out into the narrow village lane, your feet immediately sinking into a soft patch of mud that smells vaguely like something died in it last week. And maybe it did. The street isn't paved. Of course, just a packed dirt path lined with puddles, animal droppings, and whatever your neighbors dumped from their chamber pots during the night. You try to stick to the slightly drier middle path, but even that is more luck than strategy. Flies buzz around your head in thick, lazy spirals, their wings droning with a kind of smug persistence. And no matter how many you swat away, they return, undeterred and possibly insulted. You tug your cloak higher over your mouth, hoping to block out the worst of the smell. But it's already in your nose and throat and soul. The village around you is slowly waking up. Thatched roof cottages line either side of the path, leaning slightly from centuries of wind and poor repairs. Their walls patched with daub and manure. Smoke trickles from a few chimneys, curling into the sky like a timid whisper. You pass by a woman dumping a bucket of gray wash water into the gutter, the splash mixing with runoff and who knows what, to create a murky stream that slithers through the village. Children play nearby, barefoot and shouting, kicking a ball made from stitched rags. One slips and falls face first into the muck, but laughs anyway, smearing it across his cheeks like war paint. No one rushes to clean him. Soap is too precious, and baths are reserved for illness or holy days, not muddy adventures. A cart creaks by, drawn by a pair of sluggish oxen with flies swarming their backs. The driver, half asleep and chewing on something that might be bark, nods at you, his beard crusted with bits of last night's stew. You nod back. That's the language of the street quiet acknowledgement, and the shared misery of existing in this filth. You pass the tannery and instantly regret it. The smell hits you like a brick wall dipped in old cheese and wet death. Animal hides hang from racks, dripping with lye and whatever mysterious concoctions the tanner uses to soften them. The air burns your nostrils, and you hold your breath until the stench fades into the usual village rot. And then, just when you think it can't get worse, you see the pig pen. They've escaped again. A dozen fat, squealing pigs wander the lane freely, rooting in trash piles, and occasionally charging at unlucky pedestrians. One snorts in your direction, eyes gleaming with feral confidence, and you take a respectful detour, giving it the kind of wide berth usually reserved for royalty or unpredictable nobles. Behind you, someone curses as the pig knocks over a stand of onions. The vendor just shrugs and begins retying his bundles with grim determination. There's a casual chaos to the village everything. It's always slightly broken, slightly dangerous, and no one seems surprised. Historians still argue whether these conditions were truly universal or if some villages were better maintained, but you wouldn't know it here. A dog trots past with something unidentifiable in its mouth. Possibly a shoe, possibly not a shoe-on. No one seems particularly concerned. You spot a rat dart between two buildings, bold and plump, and mentally add it to the running list of creatures who live more confidently in this town than you do. As you continue walking, you dodge a splash from a second-story window, emptying a chamber pot. Without so much as a warning shout, the contents splatter into the street, narrowly missing your foot. You mutter a prayer under your breath and keep moving. Above you, laundry flaps between buildings, hung on ropes, stretched like tight ropes. over your head. The clothes are stiff with wind and age, but at least they're vaguely clean. You walk past the village well, where a small line has already formed. A woman holds a full bucket with both hands, her arms shaking from the effort. Water sloshes onto her skirt, but she doesn't stop. Everyone here knows what it means to waste effort. You nod to her, and she nods back. A silent exchange of shared suffering. The village doesn't offer privacy, nor does it offer silence. You're always being watched by neighbors, by livestock, by saints carved into doorways. Conversations are shouted, not spoken, and gossip flows faster than the muck in the gutters. You overhear someone talking about a neighbor's cough, wondering if it's just the usual winter cold or something worse. No one says the word plague, but it hangs in the air like smoke. Another person complains about a missing chicken. Accusations of theft are casual here, often flung like mud, and rarely settle without shouting or a bruised rib. You keep walking, eyes low, hoping not to get dragged into someone else's drama. You reach the edge of the village, where the buildings thin out and the road stretches toward the fields. You pause for a moment, staring at the open countryside. It should feel free and peaceful, but all you see is more mud, more work, and the vague threat of outlaws or wolves. Still, there's air here. Fresher. At least you take a deep breath, tasting something that might be grass beneath the usual bouquet of decay. Then, with a sigh, you turn back toward the center of the village. There's work to be done. Always work. Always something needing, hauling, fixing, feeding, mending. You glance down at your shoes, now caked in something you don't want to identify, and begin trudging again, because in this world, even standing still too long feels like asking for trouble. You make your way toward the workshop, shoulders already aching, with the kind of fatigue that no amount of rest ever truly shakes off. Because today you've been assigned to help the blacksmith, and if you think swinging hammers and lifting iron is glamorous, wait until your lungs are full of smoke and your skin smells like scorched metal for 3 days straight. The smithy is a cave of chaos heat, radiates from the forge like a living beast licking at your face, and soot clings to everything, including your teeth when you breathe through your mouth. Which you do often because the air inside is so thick it feels like drinking smoke. The blacksmith grunts at you, points to a pile of horseshoes, and you already know what he wants. Carry them, stack them, and keep the fire stoked. While he shaped steel like a furious artist, his hammer ringing out in steady, punishing rhythm. You're not forging anything, just assisting, which means a lot of hauling, turning bellows, and dodging sparks to spit out like angry fireflies. The heat is unbearable. Your clothes stick to your back, and your fingers feel too swollen to grip anything properly. But you push through, because no one here asks if you retired. They just ask why something isn't done yet. Your only break is to fetch water from the barrel outside, and even that's lukewarm and tastes faintly of iron. You splash some on your face, instantly regretting it, as the mixture of sweat and soot creates a gritty mask that stings your eyes. Back inside, you catch the blacksmith cursing under his breath about a broken tong, and he hands it to you to fix, knowing full well you've never repaired one before. You fumble with it while he returns to hammering, and you hope you won't break it worse, because tools are precious, and replacing them involves barter, not shopping. You not even officially apprenticed used. Another pair of desperate hands trying to not get stepped on in the village hierarchy. The job isn't safe either. Burns, Flying embers, heavy tools falling from benches. Injury is common, and medical help is as helpful as praying to a tree stump. You've seen someone lose a toe when a blade slipped, and he just wrapped it with a cloth and limped off, bleeding into the dirt. You glance at your own boots, or what passes for them, and wonder how many more days your feet can take this abuse. And if the smithy isn't your post for the day, you might find yourself in the fields, scything wheat under the blazing sun, your back bent in that permanent peasant curve, or stacking hay bales, until your arms feel like jelly, or even worse, mucking out the animal stalls, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Today, it's the forge, but tomorrow, who knows? Maybe you'll be repairing fences with splinters the size of arrows, or carrying water to the manor kitchen, or climbing onto a roof to help replace thatch, while birds scream at you from the chimney. And just to keep things spicy, there's always the chance of stepping on a rusty nail, getting stung by a wasp, or falling into a ditch. Every job carries the quiet promise of bodily harm. Historians still argue whether the average medieval laborer had leisure time, but you laugh internally at the idea you barely have time to eat. Meals are grabbed in the middle of tasks, maybe a few bites of bread and a sip of ale between swings of the hammer, or turns at the grindstone. You wipe your brow with a filthy sleeve, smearing soot across your face like war paint, and keep going, because stopping just isn't an option. Your muscles protest, your fingers cramp, but you know better than to complain. The blacksmith eyes you once, then nods, slightly not approval, just acknowledgement that you haven't passed out yet. You think about that time last week when the miller's boy collapsed from heat, and how they left him in the shade with a damp rag on his forehead, hoping he'd wake up. He did, but he hasn't looked the same since. You scrape a lump of charcoal off the bench and wonder if it would help with the taste in your mouth. Someone said chewing it helps with stomach sickness, though that might have been sarcasm. You lean into the rhythm of the work, letting the clanging hammers and roaring fire drown out your thoughts. There's something almost meditative in the repetition sweat. Lift, carry, repeat. The day drags, as it always does, measured not by clocks, but by how many times your arms give out, or how many buckets of coal you've had. You wonder briefly what it would be like to work indoors with clean tools and predictable hours, then laugh at the absurdity of the thought. Luxury doesn't exist for you. Survival is the only job title you get. Occasionally, someone comes by with a message or request from the manor, and you straighten your back, just in case it's someone important enough to punish disrespect. You've heard stories of boys being whipped for getting a bow, and while it might be exaggerated, you're not willing to test it. A sudden spark pops from the forge and lands on your sleeve. You slap at it, you inspect the singe mark, and decide not to think about how many of your clothes have tiny holes from moments like this. Your hands are sooty, your lungs feel like they've been lined with smoke, and your stomach growls with the hunger of a skip lunch. But still, you carry another bucket to the forge because the fire doesn't feed itself, and neither do you. And when the day finally starts to dim, when the sun begins to slouch toward the horizon in a blaze of dusty orange, you don't stop because there's still more to be done. You don't so much eat lunch as survive it, if you're lucky enough to get anything at all, because food in your world isn't about enjoyment, it's about not passing out before sundown. And today's midday meal is the same as yesterday's and the day before. A grayish stew of grains, onions, maybe a turnip, if fortune smiled upon the cook, and always cooked in the same pot, day after day. with leftovers simply reheated and topped off, with more water and scraps until the whole thing has taken on the consistency and charm of wet plaster. You sit on an overturned bucket behind the house, spoon in hand well. Not really a spoon, more like a carved wooden scoop. It's absorbed so many flavors over the years. It probably has its own opinions, and you fish out a lumpy bit that might be meat, but is more likely a bit of dried mushroom or tough root, and you chew carefully, not because you're savoring it, but because you're trying not to crack a molar on something unexpected. You glance into the bowl and see something floating, maybe a beetle, maybe a banana. There's no salt, of course, not unless someone managed to trade for it last week. And spices are a fantasy reserved for travelers and lords. Most days, the flavor is a blend of bitterness, smoke, and faint mildew. But today, you think you detect something new, possibly, but more likely just a greenish weed someone grabbed from the ditch to pretend it's seasoning. You keep eating. Hunger doesn't wait for taste. Your neighbor is gnawing on a crust of dark bread, so hard he has to soak it in ale before attempting another bite. And even then, it resists like it's holding a grudge. Speaking of ale, you get a small cup of the week. Watery stuff brewed from fermented barley. Barely alcoholic, but enough to keep you hydrated and vaguely cheerful. If you drink fast enough, water from the stream is always a gamble, and you're not ready to play dice with dysentery again this month. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was nutritionally adequate, and maybe it was in theory, but in practice, you're tired, pale, and losing weight you don't have to spare. Because the growing season was poor, and the grain got moldy, and that pig you were raising died mysteriously 2 weeks ago, leaving behind only a haunting smell and the vague suspicion that it might have been cursed or just really unlucky. You scrape the bottom of your bowl with your scoop, collecting the mushy bits that stick like glue to the wood, and you consider licking the spoon, then do it, because dignity isn't on the menu either. A fly lands on your cheek, and you slap it without thinking, smearing something that might have been soup or sweat or both. There's no dessert, of course, unless someone saved a crust of dried fruit or, miraculously, a berry pie scrap from the manor kitchen, which you'd sell your own shoe to taste. You remember once having a fig brought by a traveling monk, and the memory is so golden it doesn't feel real anymore. Around you, others are finishing up, wiping mouths with sleeves, burping quietly, and standing slowly. Bellies barely full, but just enough to keep moving. You don't linger. Food time is short, and work time is endless. You rinse your bowl in a shared tub of gray water, swirling it quickly and pretending it's clean. The chickens eye you from their coop like they know how low you've sunk, and you glare back because you're not in the mood to be judged by birds. Lunch is over, but you're still hungry. Your hands are still shaking slightly, and the wind feels colder now that your stomach is slightly less empty. You remember the stories the old men tell about famine years, when people boiled grass or ground tree bark into flour, and suddenly today's meal doesn't seem so bad. You once heard a tale, probably exaggerated of a town so desperate they cooked leather shoes into stew. Whether or not it's true, you've reached a point where you believe it could be. You'll scratch your head and rise, stomach turning a little from whatever that floating bit was, and start walking back to wherever someone's yelling for help. You don't really know what's next. Maybe collecting firewood, maybe chasing sheep, maybe digging a hole no one will explain, but whatever it is, you'll do it. fueled by half a bowl of mystery mush and sheer peasant determination. Because in the Middle Ages, lunch isn't a break, it's just a pause between rounds of exhaustion. You barely finished wiping the last trace of pottage from your chin when someone shouts your name and points toward the animal pens, which can only mean one thing. Something has escaped, something has gotten stuck, or something has exploded in the most disgusting way possible. And as you trudge over with feet still dragging from lunch, that didn't really count. The stench hits you like a wall made of warm manure and wet fur. Because the pigs have been wallowing again, and at least one of them looked suspiciously like it rolled through the leavings of every other animal in the yard. You climb over the low fence boots, immediately sinking into the churned up muck. That is definitely more feces than dirt, and you dodge an angry-looking chicken on your way to the main offender, a massive sow named Beat, who stares at you with the blank, vaguely judgmental eyes of something that knows you are not in control here. You try to herd her back into the sty with a stick and some gentle shoving, but she grunts, ignores you, and charges toward the feed trough, like she owns the place, splashing half-fermented slop onto your leg in the process. You swear under your breath and keep pushing, eventually coaxing her inside, slamming the gate shut behind her, and taking a moment to wipe your brow with a sleeve now saturated with pig effort. You smell like the inside of a barn now. And that's assuming the barn hasn't flooded recently. Across the yard, someone is struggling with a cow, which is trying to scratch its side against a fence post, nearly tipping the entire pen over in the process. You head over, instinctively grabbing a rope to tie her back into place. And as you work, you notice the clusters of flies nestled into the creases of a hide. Little black knots that twitch and pulse as she flicks her tail. Every animal has fleas. Every human does, too. You've given up trying to fight them. You scratch the back of your neck absent-mindedly and feel something pop another louse. Probably a dog barks nearby, lunging at a tether, desperate to chase a squirrel, or maybe just to remind the world that it is angry and itchy and alive. You glance over to the chicken coop, where the hens are pecking each other over a moldy carrot, feathers flying like a tiny, angry pillow fight. You're supposed to gather eggs, so you trudge over, reach under the brooding hen, and get pecked on the wrist so hard you nearly drop the egg you manage to pull out. You mutter another curse, suck on the wound, and drop the egg into the basket, which already has a crack from last week's tumble, but still holds enough to make breakfast for someone tomorrow. The goats, meanwhile, are halfway up the fence again, chewing on the laundry you forgot to bring in yesterday. One of them looks at you with genuine spite as you wrestle the shirt out of its mouth, leaving behind holes you'll have to patch with thread you don't have. And through it all, you're sneezing constantly, not because you're sick, but because the hay dust standard and whatever that goat sneezed in your face have conspired to turn your nose into a leaking faucet. The sun beats down, warming the layers of animal scent now baked into your skin. And you can't remember the last time you didn't smell like barn. Historians often romanticize the connection between peasants and their livestock, speaking of humble coexistence and mutual dependence. But what they usually skip over is the sheer amount of filth, noise, and injury involved in keeping animals alive long enough to either milk them or eat them. You've been bitten, trampled, kicked, and chased more times than you can count. Last summer, a goose drew blood from your ankle, and you still flinch whenever one hisses. Your cousin once broke an arm, falling from the hayloft while chasing a cat that had stolen an egg, and he was lucky. That same week, someone else got trampled trying to separate the fighting rams and walked with a limp ever since. Your daily life is a petting zoo run by chaos. And there's never a moment when something isn't trying to escape, destroy, or defecate on something important. You swat at a flea crawling up your sleeve, then flick a beetle off your boot, and consider that you've become strangely used to this. You can differentiate between fresh manure and the stuff that's been sitting for a day. You know the exact sound a pig makes when it's hungry versus when it's about to bite. You've developed a sixth sense for when the goats are about to knock something over. And you've accepted that your boots will never, ever smell normal again. The animal pens are your second home, whether you like it or not. And as you finally finish scrubbing the water trough and step back, sore, splattered, and swarmed with gnats, you wonder if there's any part of you that still counts as clean. The answer is no. Absolutely not. You gave up on clean somewhere between the time the rooster pooped on your head last year and the morning you woke up with a slug in your shoe. But you're still here, still standing, and tomorrow you'll probably be out here again, covered in mud and pride, trying to convince a cow to stop chewing on the fence. This is the rhythm of your life. Now filthy, relentless, oddly familiar. You're dragging your feet by now. And not just because they hurt, although. They do, deeply. In places you didn't know could ache, but because the afternoon brings a new kind of weight. The heavy, sagging fatigue that settles over your shoulders like a wool blanket soaked in rain. And as the sun arcs downward, casting long, dusty shadows across the village paths, you know what's coming next. More chores, more lifting, more walking, more of everything, except rest. Someone calls for help. Near the edge of the field where bundles of thatch have to be stacked for roofing, and you sigh. The kind of slow, soul-weary sigh. It means you've already given up inside, and yet you go anyway, because saying no isn't an option unless you want to be accused of laziness. And laziness is just one slippery step away from punishment or rumors, or worse. You'll reach the field, your tunic sticking to your back from sweat and grime, and take your place beside the others, hoisting dried sheaves onto a wooden sledge that will eventually be dragged to the carpenter's hut. The straw cuts into your arms as you lift it, the dry stalks brittle and sharp, and you blink through the cloud of dust it kicks up, eyes watering, nose twitching, lungs tightening with every breath. There's no mask, no protection, just you and a job to do. The carpenter barks, something about speed, even though your pace is already bordering on collapse, and you keep going, rhythmically lifting, tossing, adjusting, like a cog in a tired, itchy machine. A boy slips and falls beside you, vanishing momentarily into the golden piles, and no one laughs. Just a few half-hearted glances, a grunt, a hand to pull him out. Everyone's too tired to care. You press on. Over time, your arms lose sensation, not from strength, but from overuse. A numbness that replaces pain only because your body can't keep up with reporting every detail. You wipe your forehead, leaving a smear of dirt across your brow, and spot the village priest walking by, hands folded, robes dragging slightly in the dust. He nods in your direction, perhaps in approval or just acknowledgement that you're not dead yet. You've heard him preach that suffering is holy, that toil is a path to salvation. But right now, you'd trade your soul for a nap and a clean shirt. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant worked fewer hours than modern people, citing seasonal rhythms and feast day breaks. But in your reality, the labor doesn't stop when the sun goes down. It just shifts into different forms, different aches. Your evening is already waiting for you. Fetching water, repairing tools, helping your sister comb the knots and lice from your younger brother's hair while he howls like a banshee, and maybe, if time allows, scrubbing a tunic in the freezing water of a wash basin. As the last bundle of straw is loaded, your back spasms briefly and you pause hands on knees, pretending to adjust your footing because admitting you're hurting is dangerous, a weakness that others might notice. And if you can't pull your weight, you're just another mouth the village has to feed. One of the older men chuckles dryly and tells a story about how he used to do twice this work with half your strength. And you nod politely, even though you know he's lying, because that's what people do. They lie about how much easier things used to be, as if nostalgia could stretch backward into a time when their bones didn't teeth crack like twigs. Every time they stood up, you eventually shuffled back toward the village straw, clinging to your sleeves and hair eyes, stinging from the sun and dust. And you pass by the communal garden where a few women are pulling weeds and shooing away a stray dog trying to gnaw at a squash. The plants look sad, leaves drooping under the summer heat, and someone mutters about needing a good rain soon, or else the harvest will suffer. You know what that means. Smaller loaves, thinner soup, more mouths muttering in the night from hunger. Every plant that fails now becomes a bruise on the village's stomach. Months from now, you crouch to help for a moment, yanking out a stubborn thistle and earning a thorn in the palm for your trouble. And you curse again under your breath, quieter this time, as if the weeds themselves might retaliate. At the well, the line has already begun, wooden buckets and clay jugs resting in a row like patient animals, and you join the end, shifting your weight from foot to foot, knowing the cold water will sting your raw hands, but still looking forward to the relief of it anyway. When it's your turn, you lower the bucket slowly, muscles trembling from overuse, and haul it back up with a splash, careful not to spill too much. Because this water is life. Bathing, drinking, cooking, everything depends on it. Even if it smells faintly of moss and occasionally delivers a wriggling surprise, you trudge back home with your bucket, arms shaking, legs stiff, and every step feels longer than the last. Your home isn't much to look at: stone foundation, timber walls, thatch roof, patched with whatever you could find. But it's shelter, and that counts for something. You step inside and are immediately enveloped by the musty warmth of the single shared room, where smoke from the cooking fire curls in slow ribbons and someone's feet are too close to the hearth again. You set down the water with a sigh and sit on a stool that creaks ominously beneath you. You've been working for what feels like 20 hours, and the sun isn't even fully down yet. Someone asks you to mend something, maybe a fence latch, maybe a torn sleeve. You nod and file it in the growing list of things you'll probably forget until someone yells again. You scratch your arm, feel the welt of a fresh insect bite, and look around at the familiar chaos, the predictable noise, the endless movement that defines your entire existence. There is no peace, only pauses. There is no comfort, only less discomfort. You're not just tired, you are weariness made flesh. You barely have time to let your eyes adjust to the dim firelight before someone thrusts a wooden bowl into your hands and calls it dinner. Though what's inside might be more accurately described as a wet memory of food than food itself. A watery turnip stew with a suspicious chunk that could be either meat or very committed bread, and you sip it cautiously, Not because it is hot, but because you're trying to guess what part of the animal you're tasting, if it is indeed animal at all. And as you eat, you can hear the sounds of the village shifting from work to what passes for leisure, which is to say, not dying of exhaustion. Children shriek somewhere outside, playing a game that involves more mud than rules. And their laughter is sharp, wild, the kind of joy that burns out fast, because the day has stolen almost everything else. And you hear adults settling into familiar rituals, mending nets, darning socks, muttering complaints about sore knees and stingy landlords. You finish your meal and place the bowl aside, now crusted with something that will likely dry into a permanent feature, and step outside into the cooling twilight where the air smells of wood smoke, sweat, and something faintly rotten. But the sky at least offers a break, a stretch of purple and gray that softens the outline of the huts. The trees, even the manure pile now slumping in shadows. You wander toward the common area where a few villagers are gathering in a loose, tired circle, and someone is trying to play a melody on a carved flute that has slightly out of tune and slightly more out of skill. A couple of boys start a wrestling match in the dirt, cheered on by groggy onlookers who shout half-hearted encouragement. While nursing mugs of something fermented that smells like regret, you stand there, arms crossed, watching them tumble and grunt, and you can't help but admire their energy. Even if they'll both wake up with bruises and no memory of who actually won, one of the older men begins to tell a story, something about a traveling knight who was tricked by a clever pig butt. His voice is low and rambling, and soon no one's really listening, the tale unraveling like a poorly woven basket. You sit down on a log that has been worn smooth by countless tired bodies, and let your shoulders slump, because for the first time all day, you're not being ordered to do anything. Not being chased by a goat or pecked by a hen or splattered with pig muck. And this moment, this gentle lull in the chaos, is what passes for peace. Historians often describe peasant recreation as communal and rustic, filled with folk songs and moral tales and games that brought the village together. And sure, there's some of that, but mostly it's people trying not to keel over from fatigue, sharing stories they've half forgotten, and sometimes laughing not because something is funny, but because their bodies are too sore to do anything else. Someone proposes a game, a simple one, involving pebbles and speed end. You play along, fumbling through the motions more out of obligation than interest. But when you win a round, there's a brief flicker of pride that warms your ribs. The losers grumble, the winners gloat without much energy, and someone jokingly offers to crown you king of the pebbles before quickly forgetting what the rules even were. The light continues to fade. Torches flicker on with sputtering flames, and moths begin their nightly orbit. Someone sings off-key but confidant a song about lost sheep and an even more lost shepherd. And a few people join in, not bothering to harmonize, but filling the space with sound that feels ancient, as if the notes have lived in these voices longer than memory. You catch yourself yawning, the kind that starts in your jaw and spreads all the way down your spine, and realize that whatever fun this was supposed to be is now dissolving into a shared, unspoken agreement. It is time to return to the darkness of your own little corner of this weary world. As you stand and stretch, back cracking like dry twigs, you step over a sleeping dog and wave half-heartedly at the man still telling that night and pig story to no one in particular. On the walk back, you glance up at the stars, fewer than usual tonight, perhaps hidden behind clouds, or smoke, and wonder, briefly, what entertainment looks like in centuries yet to come. Probably not singing about livestock. Probably not dodging pebbles and mosquito swarms. You imagine, just for fun, a device that plays moving pictures or music you can summon with a finger, and then laugh at yourself for being so absurd. You're a peasant. You don't even have enough fabric for a second shirt, let alone a machine that sings. Still, it's a funny thought, and it stays with you all the way back to your hut, where the evening games will be replaced by the night quieter rituals. Rinsing your feet in cold water, laying out your single blanket, swatting away the first few bugs that dive for your face the moment you lie down. Maybe tomorrow someone will bring dice, or someone's uncle will try juggling again, or maybe you will just sit in silence watching sparks drift up from the fire like lost thoughts. It doesn't matter. Fun year is not a luxury. It's a small rebellion against the grime and the ache, a way to remind each other that not just tools for tilling and hauling and scrubbing you. Still human, even if only barely. The next morning doesn't begin so much as it resumes, because sleep, as you've come to realize, is never truly complete. Here it's a kind of half limbo, interrupted by cold drafts, coughing neighbors, and the occasional startled snorts when someone rolls over onto a splinter. But when you do finally rise, blinking crust from your eyes and stretching limbs that feel more bruised than rested, the entire village seems to shift with a kind of anxious energy, as if the air itself is holding its breath. And you soon find out why. The Lord is coming. Not God, though. He's presumably watching Tubut, the local noble, the landowner, whose name everyone speaks with either reverence or clenched teeth, depending on who's listening in his visit. Though rare, sends the entire community into a frenzy of cleaning, fixing, scrubbing, and faking whatever shreds of dignity can be mustered from a life lived in filth. You're tasked with clearing the main road of manure and smoothing the ruts left by cartwheels, which means scraping hardened piles of horse droppings with a bent shovel that wobbles more than it cuts. And as you work, you try not to gag at the smell or think too hard about how this exact task was. What's your punishment for stealing a second turnip as a child? Your fingers sting from gripping the wooden handle, the splinters embedded in your palm, protesting every motion. And yet you work faster, because this is one of those rare days where looking lazy could cost. You're more than bruised, prided. Could cost your family their place on this land. Historians debate how much power medieval lords actually wielded in daily peasant lives, some arguing that the manorial system allowed for more autonomy than we assume, while others point to records of beatings, fines, and petty tyrannies as proof that nobles ruled their estates like miniature kingdoms. Either way, your experience leaves little room for theory. You know that when the Lord rides through, you bow, you smile, and you pray his gaze passes over you like sunlight on a stone. You straighten your back and wipe your hands on your tunic as the sound of hooves grows louder, echoing off the timber walls and bouncing across the thatch roofs. And soon he appears, flanked by mounted retainers and gleaming mail spears, upright like crooked flags of authority. The Lord himself wears a rich cloak, deep blue fastened, with a brooch that probably costs more than everything in your home combined. And he sits atop a muscular, well-fed horse that snorts disdainfully at the villagers lined up in a trembling row. You're among them, chin-lowered, heart thudding, pretending you aren't staring at his perfectly polished boots, or wondering what kind of life you DB living if you were born into a world where soft leather and good food were guaranteed. A child sneezes, sharp and unexpected, and every adult instinctively tightens their posture, fearing even that harmless noise might draw unwanted attention. The Lord says nothing at first, simply surveys the crowd with cool detachment, as if he's choosing which tree to lean against while he watches the world crumble. Then, a clerk dismounts and begins to read a proclamation, something about taxes, grain quotas, maybe conscription. Honestly, you stop listening halfway through, your brain too focused on looking respectful and not accidentally scratching your nose in a way that could be interpreted as insolence. Still, you catch the important parts. The tides will rise this season due to poor returns from other estates. Several men will be needed for roadwork beyond the village, and someone named Tomlin, a boy you recognize as barely older than you, is being fined for trapping rabbits on protected land. Gasps ripple through the crowd at that last one, and Tomlin's mother bursts into sobs, but no one moves to comfort. Her attention is dangerous right now. The Lord finally speaks, offering a few rehearsed words about duty and loyalty. His voice smooth, bored, like he's ordering meat at a tavern. And then, without waiting for applause or acknowledgement, he wheels his horse and rides off, his retinue clattering behind him like a mobile thunderstorm. The villagers exhale as one a collective sag of shoulders and nerves, and you feel your spine relax, even as your stomach tightens, because you know what comes next. The muttering, the fury, the quiet resentment that will simmer in kitchens and fields for days to come. Someone spits into the dirt, earning a sharp elbow from their wife, while another mutters a half-joke about the noble dung now staining the road. But no one laughs too loud, just in case someone loyal is still listening. You wander away from the gathering, boots scuffing the now erect road you'd just cleaned, and wonder how it feels to command that kind of fear with just a glance. Probably lonely, probably addictive. Their essay story passed around by the older villagers about a lord who went mad with power, demanding his peasants kneel every time his shadow passed over them. And though it sounds like a fable, part of you wonders if it's just exaggerated truth. You return to your hut to find your family tense, the air inside charged with the same quiet anger you feel in your own chest. And your father is pacing, muttering numbers under his breath. The new tax burden already being calculated and worried over before the ink on the proclamation is dried. You offer to help patch the roof before nightfall, if only to give your hands something to do besides clenching into fists. And while you climb to the rickety crossbeam, you catch sight of the road again, the same spot where the Lord passed not long ago, now empty, as if he were a phantom conjured only to take and vanish. A gust of wind kicks up the dust where his horse had trotted, and you swear it smells faintly of perfume and power. Sunday comes, not with rest, but with ritual, and you wake before the sun to prepare for what is both the holiest and possibly the most baffling day of the week. Because despite the bone-deep fatigue and a lingering ache in your back from patching the roof, you know better than to miss Mass. Not because you particularly understand it, but because everyone else is going, and no one wants to be the one the priest stares at with narrowed eyes and fire and brimstone breath, so you rub the sleep from your eyes. Pull on your least tattered tunic, still vaguely damp from yesterday. Esther and shuffle out into the early morning haze, where the mist clings low like a whispered warning. You join the slow procession of villagers making their way to the church, a squat stone building that leans slightly to one side, as if bowing under centuries of whispered confessions. And inside, the air is cool and heavy with incense, and the unmistakable smell of damp wool and shed doubt. You take your place on the hard wooden bench, knees brushing the worn boards in front of you, and fold your hands, even though you still don't entirely know why, because the words that fill the air, lit chants, and solemn phrases are entirely foreign to your ears, like listening to a spell in a dream you're not sure you're supposed to wake from. The priest, wrapped in thick embroidered robes that shimmer even in the gloom, begins the service with the confidence of someone who knows that understanding IT required only obedience, and his voice echoes off the stone walls, each syllable bouncing back like a small hammer tapping your temples. You sneak a glance around the room and see the same expressions on every face, a mixture of reverence, confusion, and a little fear, because while the specifics may be lost to you, the consequences are very clear. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly believed every sermon or merely performed the motions out of habit and survival. But your experience suggests it as a blurry line between genuine terror of eternal damnation and the pragmatic desire not to be accused of heresy, which, by the way, can get you burned. The priest speaks of sin, of salvation, of divine punishment, and you catch only fragments: see eternal fire, the wrath of the Lamb, purgatory's endless waiting room, and, while you'd like to focus on the promise of heaven, your stomach growls audibly, and your mind keeps drifting to whether there'll be any bread left when you return home. Still, you kneel when others kneel, cross yourself when others do, and nod along like you re-grasping theological subtleties. Instead of thinking about the rat you saw near the grain sack yesterday, midway through the homily a hush falls as the priest raises a small round wick, and everyone watches, breath held, as if this moment might be the one that finally lifts the daily burdens, or at least distracts from them for a few precious seconds. You line up with the rest, receive the host on your tongue, and it tastes like dry paper and fear, but you swallow dutifully, because refusing is not an option, unless you want to be the subject of whispers and suspicion. After the service, people linger outside the church trading gossip, discussing who didn't show up and who looked like they might be harboring secret sins, and you stand among them, nodding politely, offering vague comments, trying to blend into the sacred and profane blur defines this one collective breath of stillness before the week resumes its slow grind. One of the elders talks about the signs of the end times: bad harvests, crooked stars, too many left-handed children in. You listen intrigued, but skeptical, because every generation seems to think it's the last, and somehow the world keeps limping forward. Another man argues that saints visit him in dreams, giving him advice about crop rotation and moral purity, while a third claims he saw a glowing woman near the well last night and is now convinced she was the Virgin Mary, or a very clean thief. Superstition, it seems, weaves through daily life, like thread through homespun linen, and you've learned not to challenge. It's especially not in front of your grandmother, who once slapped your cousin with a leek for mocking a blessing ritual. You remember that just last week, someone buried a toad near the door to ward off illness, and no one questioned it because last time they didn't. Half the village got boils. You walk slowly back home, the sacred weight of the morning lingering, even as hunger claws at your gut again. And when you arrive, you change back into your work tunic. Not because you want to, but because your mother says it is bad luck to wear church clothes while cleaning out the chicken coop, and you've seen what she does with that wooden spoon when crossed. Still, there's something oddly grounding about the ritual. Even if you don't understand it, fully a rhythm to the week, it gives shape to the otherwise shapeless grind, like punctuation marks in a sentence that never quite ends. And as you settle into the day's simpler task, pulling weeds, check-in snares, pretending not to see the neighbor's pig, rooting through your compost, you hum a bit of the morning hymn under your breath, not because it makes sense, but because in a world where everything else feels uncertain, those ancient, echoing melodies feel like the closest thing you have to a guarantee. As twilight creeps over the village like a lazy fog and the smell of distant wood smoke curls through the air, you shuffle back to your hut, ready for the so-called comforts of medieval evening, which is really just another name for trying to survive the darkness without tripping over a chicken or stepping on something worse. And inside your cramped wooden space, lit only by the faint flicker of a sputtering tallow candle that smells faintly of old mutton and misery, your family gathers for the nightly ritual of doing more with less. Dinner, if you can call it that, is a thin stew with the consistency of watery regret and the taste of boiled turnip sadness, ladled into rough wooden bowls. While you pretend the brown lump floating in yours eyes and tea, a suspiciously chewy root, or worse, something that once squeaked, you eat in silence, mostly not out of reverence, but because chewing takes concentration when your food fights back and your jaw aches from gnawing on crusty bread that could double as a roof tile, but you keep going because hunger doesn't leave room for After the meal, your mother pulls out the mending pile, and you sit by her side, squinting at a pair of hole-ridden hose, threading a dull needle with stiff fingers as candlelight dances shadows across the walls like ghosts, rehearsing for a haunting. The clothes are always torn, always damp, and always in need of repair, because replacing anything is a luxury you've never even imagined, and even the concept of new feels like a fairy tale told by rich merchants to taunt the rest of you. Historians still argue whether peasant households were truly this self-sufficient or relied more on communal aid. But from your aching fingers and your mother's whispered curses, it seems painfully clear that self-sufficiency here means everyone doing everything all the time, even when they're too tired to speak. Your father sharpens tools that are already worn to nubs. Your younger siblings try to untangle knots in a fishing net. You're not even sure. Stick of cheese, anything, and someone in the corner sneezes violently, a wet sound that echoes far too ominously in a confined space. And everyone goes still for a moment, silently praying it's not the start of another comforting bout of illness. Because you've seen what happens when fevers spread in huts this tight. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry beast, rattling the crude shutters, and you stuff straw into the biggest cracks in the wall, hoping it'll block some of the cold, or at least the noise. Your grandmother, always dramatic, begins telling a story about the time she saw will-o'-the-wisp in the marsh, and swears it tried to lead her into the bog. And while most of you roll your eyes or smirk behind your hands, no one openly mocks her, because in a world where death is always just a cough, a cut, or a careless step away, even the outlandish starts to sound plausible. You finally crawl into bed, or rather, a flattened pile of straw and old cloth that you try to believe once resembled a mattress, and pull the itchy wool blanket over your head, trying to ignore the musty smell and the occasional pinch of what is almost certainly a flea. There's no pillow, just a bundled tunic stuffed with hay that pokes you in places you didn't think could be poked, and you curl into yourself, listening to the sounds of your family, settling in creaking joints, slow breathing, someone whispering a half-finished prayer, and the distant hoot of an owl outside, which your sister says is a sign of death. But your uncle insists just means rats are nearby. You think back to the days, small victories, only one splinter. No burns, and nobody yelled directly at you, which, by current standards, makes for a decent day. You try not to think about the candle stub that almost burned down completely, or the hole in the roof you didn't quite finish patching, or the weird rattle in your chest. That one quite go away, and instead focus on the dream of a warm place, maybe with cushions and bread that doesn't break your teeth, where blankets don't itch, and people bathe more than once a season. It's a fantasy, of course, but it helps soften the edge of the night. As the candle finally gutters out with a sullen hiss, the room plunges into darkness, and you lie still. Try not to breathe too loudly, trying not to think about the rats that sometimes scratch beneath the floorboards, or the thought that this is your life and it's not even the worst it could be. Somewhere across the village, a baby cries, a dog barks, and the wind sighs again like it knows your name, and you close your eyes and whisper to no one. Maybe tomorrow will be quieter. Maybe tomorrow you won't tear your only pair of hose, or spill soup on your last clean tunic. Maybe tomorrow the stew will have something besides roots in it. You're asleep before you finish the thought, pulled under not by comfort, but by the sheer exhaustion of having endured another day. You wake in darkness again. Though whether it is early morning or just deep in the middle of the night is hard to tell. Because in your world, time is measured more by roosters and aching joints than by clocks. And as you sit up slowly, scratching at your scalp and trying to ignore the cold that bites at your feet through the thin blanket, you realize the fire has gone out completely, and your breath fogs faintly in the air like a ghost, leaving your body in slow motion. There's no snooze button. No gentle sunrise lamp, just the knowledge that the sooner you get moving, the better chance you have of not freezing or starving or being yelled at by someone who outranks you, which, frankly, includes most people. You fumble for your boots, stiff and slightly damp, and shove your feet in with a grunt, ignoring the sharp little jab that might be a pebble or a spider or yesterday's regret, and shuffle out into the muddy path that serves as a village street, where the ground squelches beneath you and your breath is the only sound for a few heavy seconds, until someone nearby yells at a chicken, which flaps into a panic and reminds everyone else that it's probably time to start the day. You're off to the woods, this time, tasked with gathering firewood because the village's tiny communal stack is running low, and someone else gotta brave the damp, tangled undergrowth, which means you trudge through thick, sucking mud, past twisted trees that loom like hunched giants, and whether not for the first time, whether you'll stumble across something worse than a wild pig. There are rumors, of course, about bandits and wolves and spirits that guard certain parts of the forest, and while you've never seen any of them, you're not in a particular hurry to call their bluff. Historians still argue whether medieval forests were truly lawless death traps or just overhyped natural pantries. But from where you're standing, drenched, lost, and clinging to a bundle of damp sticks, you'd say the truth probably lies somewhere in between. You finally gather enough Hafferton branches to satisfy whoever's keeping track. tie them with twine, and lug the bundle back through the same trail, slipping twice, once landing hard, enough to jar your teeth and smear mud across half your face like some sort of involuntary war paint. When you return to the village, there's no applause, no warm welcome, just a grunt from someone who takes the wood and mutters about how it's still too wet to burn properly. And you stand there, dripping heart-pounding, wondering if you could just scream or disappear or both. But instead you go back to your hut change into a marginally drier tunic and help your father clean the soot out of the chimney, a task involving awkward angles, a lot of coughing, and the discovery of what might be a dead bird, or maybe just a very unlucky rat. You break for what's generously called lunch, another helping of whatever stew is still clinging to the inside of the pot, flavored faintly with smoke and desperation, and then you're off again, this time sent to help mend a neighbor's fence, which somehow involves lifting heavy logs, dodging chickens, and pretending not to overhear the old man complain about how young people today don't know how to properly stack a beam. You smile through gritted teeth, nod, and try not to drop anything on your foot. The sun, such as it is, eventually dips behind the hills again, and everything turns gray and damp and ominous in that uniquely medieval way that makes you feel like the world itself is sighing. You return home once more, too tired to even eat, and collapse into your straw pile without ceremony, head spinning slightly and eyes gritty with soot. Before you sleep, you try to remember what day it is, but it doesn't really matter. The rhythm doesn't change. There's always more to do, always another splinter waiting, another cold wind to brace against, another neighbor to avoid offending. You once heard a traveler mention a place where peasants had days off, where they drank wine under grapevines and danced in the evening light. But you're pretty sure that was just a story meant to soften the edge of truth. Because here, life isn't about joy or leisure, it's about not dying. And maybe, on a good day, getting through the work without spilling too much blood, tears, or soup. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake once again to the now familiar ache behind your eyes and the dull stiffness that comes from sleeping on straw with no mattress to speak of. And as your eyes adjust to the pre-dawn murk, the room looks just like it always does, gray and dust-filled with a faint smell of yesterday's fire, old onions, and unwashed wool. But this time something feels different. Like your body has finally decided to rebel against the never-ending loop of toil and compliance. Yet you rise anyway, because in this world, choosing not to work isn't rebellion. It's just another way to starve. You start your day hauling water. Again. Only now your arms protest every movement and your breath fogs in the cool air, which smells faintly of mold and wet earth, and the bucket handles cut into your palms because the wood is rough and your calluses have cracked. At the well, you wait behind a line of equally sleep-deprived villagers and listen to the low murmur of gossip and petty complaints, none of which change anything, but everyone still clings to them like charms against a creeping sense of futility. After that, it's a blur of chores, feeding animals that barely survive, checking traps that are mostly empty, and gathering greens that are more dirt than food. And through it all, your mind drifts not, because you have time to daydream, but because even your brain needs somewhere to heighten you. Start to imagine what it would feel like to simply stop, to sit under a tree and not get up, to close your eyes and forget the endless list of tasks that define your very existence. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants accepted their lot with resigned faith or simmered in existential dread, and you can see how both might be true depending on the day. Some days you nod along to the priest's words and believe suffering is holy, and other days you wonder if all this divine plan talk is just a clever way to make poor people feel better about being used like beasts of burden. The evening creeps in again, slowly, like a blanket you didn't ask for, but can't stop. And as the shadows stretch, you realize you haven't spoken more than 5 words to anyone all day. Not because you were alone, but because nobody had the energy or reason to say anything that wasn't about work, weather, or the location of a missing goat. Dinner is forgettable, sleep is inevitable, and for the first time, as you lie back in your usual spot, you begin to imagine that if someone from the future were to step into your life for just one day, they'd probably run screaming before breakfast or weep in quiet disbelief by lunch. And yet, here you are, having done it again. Another day survived in a world built to grind you down without ever quite breaking you. As your eyes flutter shut, you think about all the strange things you've grown used to. The barefoot winters, the idea that your best hope of healing is a poultice and prayer. The lack of privacy, the constant surveillance from both church and gossiping neighbors. In a curious way, time stretches and contracts, depending on whether you recarrying firewood or waiting for bread to rise. Tomorrow will be the same work. Ache, eat, sleep. Repeat, and the day after that, too. Unless something breaks. A bone, a rule, a promise. And still, despite everything, you sense a small ember of endurance deep inside you. Not hope exactly, but stubbornness. The kind that keeps you moving, even when your knees say no and your heart says why. It's not the most inspiring trait, but it's enough to get you to the next sunrise.